Hey loves, so I realized that I missed a day of posting, so we are catching up. I realize it's Wednesday, not Monday when I'm posting this. So this was Monday's recording. Wednesday's recording will be Thursday, so tomorrow, and then Friday will be as normal. I apologize. It's been wild in my house with everything that's happening. Anyway, we are going to talk about Yvonne's story. Yvonne's story. We're going to get right into it. I was 18 years old. I was working and trying to make enough money to go to college. None of my family members had gone, just a couple of aunts who had gone to nursing school. My dad is the child of German immigrants, and he had to drop out of school in 6th grade when his father died to work and support his mother and younger brother. So his idea of accomplishment was getting all the kids through high school. When I said I want to go to college, he said, I'm not spending money on that. I wanted to study art, which he also thought was perfectly useless. I think I was a normal 18-year-old. I like to goof off and have fun. When I met my son's father, he said it was love at first sight. But he was a hopeless romantic, and I was still a virgin. What I thought was making out turned into sex, and that was my first experience. I was shocked and horrified and was sobbing my brains out. So we had sex, and then we didn't have sex again until about 2 weeks later because of my good Catholic background. I was feeling like we had to be married before we did that again. He moved into my apartment with me. I would go to work every day, and he would be there with supper when I came home. We did do it again, and the next day at work, I just knew I was pregnant. And I knew I was having a son. I just had this premonition. I panicked. When I told him, he got all excited. Oh, I'm going to be a dad. He could teach his little boy how to play the guitar and take him horseback riding and fishing. So yes, we were going to get married. He came up with this plan. His grandparents had a resort in northern Wisconsin, so we were going to move up there and live. I was going to get a job. He was in a band with some other strange people, and he was going to get whatever they call them, gigs. So I did my part. I moved back to a small town in Wisconsin where my parents lived to work and save money. I worked the night shift in a battery factory, and he moved up there with his band and a herd of other guys. Some of them I thought were really old guys. They were, 24. Okay, by the way, being 24 is not old, but, when you're young, you think that being mid-20s is old. Listen, it's not. Anyway, his friends convinced him to tell me to sleep with other guys so he could say that I didn't know who the father was. So here's somebody who had professed he loved me, and he tells me this. He didn't have to tell me twice. It was like, if you don't want me, I don't want you. I had to resort to telling my parents. My dad freaked out, and he loaded my brother in the car with me in the back seat. We're going to find that miserable son of a bee, and I'm going to castrate him. Which, I didn't really want my dad to do anything but help me raise the baby. Somehow just make sure I could do this. Well, he found him and took one look at this long-haired guitar player, which was his worst nightmare, and told him what he thought, which was, if you don't get a real job and a haircut, you're never going to see my daughter again. Then he picked him up by the collar and threw him across the room into the refrigerator and dented it with his head. We got back in the car and left. I didn't see my boyfriend again. My parents took me to Catholic Social Services, where I met with a social worker who, I don't know, when I was 18, I had a really hard time judging other people's ages. So I thought he was really ancient. Gee whiz. Sorry, this is funny. The part with the age portion, not the whole other story, but, the age portion is. Anyway, so I would say she was probably in her 50s. So the first person I heard the word adoption from, it never ever crossed my mind. I thought, well, I'm having a baby, I'm going to raise him. I kept working and I had to go see her once a week. I worked the evening shift, so I'd get home from work at maybe 1 in the morning and then had appointments with her in the early morning. So most of the time I wasn't on time. That convinced her even more that I was a horrible, irresponsible person because I was always late. I would have to go there. I would go there to have her tell me what a low life I was. How do you think you could ever raise a child? Look at you. What do you have to offer, baby? I had really long bangs at the time, and I'm sure that's because I was trying to hide. I had terrible posture. I was trying to be invisible. She'd always say, "Brush those bangs out of your face," but she used to marvel at my eyebrows. I think it was the only feature about me she thought was passable. When I got a copy of my records after my son found me, there was a physical description in there that said I had sallow skin, dark circles under my eyes, thick lips, a snub nose, and I lumbered when I walk. The only nice thing she had to say about me was that I had wonderful, naturally arching eyebrows. So it was always, what are you going to do? How are you going to support this kid? What makes you think you could possibly fit to raise a baby? And this was week after week after week. What are you going to do with your life? I think I was working for less than $1.50 an hour at the battery factory. By the way, guys, this was way before minimum wage was even introduced in the United States. And even then, I will admit, it's hard to raise a baby on your own, but you will find ways. We need to support and have resources better, but we can't be putting down parents and trying to take children away from family. Anyway, I'm sorry, it's just gross. All right, anyway, we're going back to this story. We made big battery packs with about 21 cells in them. We soldered the little wires together, and they were used for radios for soldiers in Vietnam, which always made me very sad. You know, is somebody going to die if this isn't right? So it was dirty, dirty, dirty work. It was filthy, but I religiously went off to work every night, even though my friends were out socializing. My dad said, "I'm not going to spend one damn cent on that little bastard." He dragged me off to the welfare office to apply for welfare. The plan was that I could go to a maternity home. I went along with it because obviously my wages were not going to pay for anything. He also took me to the district attorney's office to file paternity charges, which were sent off to my boyfriend's family. Of course, they totally denied it. Not our son. So the welfare was approved to pay for a maternity home and medical care. I had some time off from work, so I tried to track down my ex-boyfriend. I went to his parents' house, and I remembered his mother came out on the front steps holding his youngest brother, and there were, I'd say, probably 6 other siblings with her. I'm standing down on the sidewalk below. It was a bright sunny day, and there was a beautiful blue sky, and a couple of his siblings had the most incredible blue eyes that matched the sky. I remember that. I told her who I was, and she proceeded to scream at the top of her lungs, telling me I was nothing but a whore and a slut who had led her son astray and had given him clap or something like that. I said, "What's that?" Then I just turned around and left. See, and this is why sex education is so important, because, I know this was back in the 50s and 60s when there really wasn't much, but the more that we educate our children on sex education, not just the sex portion, but, making sure they're safe and, the puberty aspect and all of this. And there's more to it than just, sex part, right? The more informed they are and the rates go down on teen pregnancies. So we have to be aware of that. Anyway, continuing on. I went back home and kept on working at my job. There was a dance hall that had live music where my friends and I spent the weekends dancing. And I met, the most incredibly gorgeous guy I'd ever seen. He actually gave me a ride home. We stopped and walked around a golf course until 4 a.m. and talked. He walked me to my door and said goodnight. And I went inside and I thought, if I'm ever going to marry anyone, this is the person I'm going to marry. But of course, I wasn't going to breathe a word about this to him. We saw each other from July until I went to the maternity home in October. I think it was after Thanksgiving, and the social worker at the maternity home rounded up the girls and gave us a presentation about the wonders of adoption. How all these infertile people are just feeling so heartbroken, and what a wonderful thing it is for us to give our babies to them. I couldn't handle it. I left the room just sobbing my brains out. You just can't do this to us. You just can't do it. I locked myself in my room and refused to come out the rest of the day. My baby was due on December 26th. All the other girls wanted to be with their parents on Christmas, so they decided that I should be with my parents and induced my labor on December 14th. The grown-ups told me to do it, so I did it. All my life I really tried to be doing the right thing. I just didn't always get it right. On the morning of December 14th, I took the tunnel over to the hospital, which was right across from the maternity home. They put me in a room and shaved me, which I was shocked by. Then they did the internal and broke my water, hooked me up to an IV, and left the room. There might have been some kind of little light on, but it was just a really cold winter day, and the light was just cold. It was kind of a gray light, and I just lay in that bed for hours and hours. I always had horrible cramps when I was a teenager, when I got my period. Well, this was like the worst thing I could have imagined. So finally, at about 1 p.m, a nurse peeks in her head and said, "Isn't there something you can give me, because the cramps hurt so bad I can't stand it?" She said, "You should have thought that through about 9 months ago." I didn't do any screaming. I cried. Finally, it was just so bad that I rang for the nurse, and somebody decided to see what was going on. They panic. "Oh my God, the baby's going to be born." They wheeled me out of there into the blaring bright lights of the delivery room. I remember them transferring me to the table, tying my arms and legs, spread eagle. She's putting the mask over my face, and the last thing I remember was wanting my own mother, which was probably the only time in my life I ever did. I never in my life felt as alone as I did right before my baby was born. And then, I don't know how long it was, but this nurse anesthesiologist brought me out of it enough to show me the baby. So it must have been right after he was born, because he was all covered with the newborn baby stuff. And of course, I couldn't touch him because my hands were tied down. Then I was out again. The next thing I remembered, I was in recovery and I started throwing up. And I kept throwing up. Finally, I think they got sick of me throwing up in there, that they put me in a room all by myself, down at the end of the hall with the door closed, which was fine because I didn't want people looking at me. I kept on throwing up, but I managed to get myself out of bed. Every step I took felt like the guy had sewn my heel to my butt. Honest to God, I think it was around 8:40 at night that I called home and my dad answered, and I said, "Guess what? You're a grandpa. You have a grandson." And his reply was, "When are you coming home?" I said, "I don't know." That was it. I was in the hospital probably 5 days, and my son was in the baby nursery. At first, he was in one of the front rows, and I could see him. He looked just like my Aunt Katie, who is my favorite aunt on my dad's side. I thought, wow, that's a narrow little group of genes there. I guess we all think this, but he really was a beautiful baby. When they realized that I was there looking at him, he was suddenly moved way to the back. I started begging any nurse who came in to please let me see my baby, and all they said was, absolutely not. They do, okay, so pausing there, they do that so that the birth mom doesn't bond with the baby. So first of all, we know skin to skin is important, right? If it had been someone who was married, she would have been able to see the baby. The thing is, they wanted to pass this baby on for adoption, so they're going to do everything they can to sever that tie. So not allowing birth mom to be with her baby. They'll tell the child lies. I mean, there's so much that they do to really try to make this connection not possible, but even then it doesn't work. Anyway, let's continue on. The nun came over to the hospital, and I spent a whole lot of time just sobbing my heart out to her, just crying and crying. And she finally said, you know what, you're going to forget all about this. You're going to go home, and you're going to meet a nice young man, and you're going to get married, and you're going to have other babies, and you're never even going to remember you had this one. So first of all, that's not true, but they try to say anything to not just make the birth mom feel better, but to deny that they need their baby and the baby needs them. So, anyway, they moved me back over to the maternity home, where I refused to come out of my room. I didn't have a roommate because they didn't want people being around me. I wasn't making it look good. Finally, I pulled my act together. I was supposed to go home, and I said, no, I refuse to leave. I don't care where you make me go, but I'm not going back to them. So I stayed there for Christmas, and every day I would go to the newborn nursery. After supper, we folded diapers, and then I would at least get to peek in and see him. Then, just like that, one day he was gone. On Christmas, my dad called. It was the only time while I was there that he called. How come you're not home? God damn it. Get the hell home. I said, I don't care if I ever see you again. I don't want to be around you. He said, that's bullshit. You're going, that's bullshit. You're getting home. So the day after Christmas, a social worker picked me up and actually gave me some Christmas presents. She gave me some really fancy stationery, some perfume, and I thought that was kind of odd. By the time we got home, it was already dark, and she helped me unload my one little suitcase. I wasn't welcomed. Within hours, my mother was screaming at the top of her lungs about how I ruined her happy little family. She didn't want me sharing a room with my sister. She had this room where she sewed and ironed and where the kitty litter was. So they set my bed up in there So they set my bed up in there with the kitty litter. It was just kind of a walk-through room. There were no doors. It wasn't the dead of winter in Wisconsin. If it wasn't the dead of winter in Wisconsin, I'm sure she would have been glad to send me off to the barn to sleep. That's how happy she was. When I was at the maternity home, my sister, who was 14 at the time, wrote me one letter and told me how I had ruined the family name because I was a whore, and on and on. I mean, it hurt, but it didn't surprise me. I knew she didn't come up with this stuff on her own. This is what she heard at home. I went out with the guy I had met in July on New Year's Eve, and I had nothing to say. I just couldn't even talk. The only thing I was thinking about was the baby. So we didn't have very much fun, and then we didn't see each other. After New Year's, my dad marched me into town where there was a cheese packaging factory and got me a job working there. I think my son was probably 2.5 weeks when I started working there. The job involved standing in one spot on the cement doing the same thing all day. I felt like absolute death when I got home. I still got up and went to work and just kept on. It was maybe the second week at work. This guy who worked there was 2 years behind me in school. Hey, I heard you had a baby. I stood right there and I said, ha, where'd you hear that? And he said, oh, I just heard it. I said, well, you're wrong. I actually denied my own child. He said, yeah, well, that's not what I heard. I just felt like, what a horrible, horrible mother. I mean, it was bad enough I didn't know where he was, but to deny his existence. The social worker would call at least once a week. Well, did you make up your mind yet? Well, I'm trying to figure this out. By the time I was trying to weigh the options, I kept a diary. What's worse for a child to grow up being adopted or being labeled illegitimate? What's going to be harder for him to live with? I thought, bottom line, if I put this off long enough, she'll just say, the kid's too old, you'll have to take him home. I think it was early in February when I did talk to my mother about keeping him. Even after a horrible childhood with her, she was my last hope. She said she would babysit while I worked, but that scared me because of the way she treated me. I mean, she stopped beating me when I was 14 because I grew 5 inches and suddenly I was taller than she was. I was very concerned about leaving my baby with someone who was capable of doing that, but I was desperate. Of course, I'd have to pay her for babysitting besides the room and board that I was paying. I called the social worker. This was just the happiest day. I was calling to find out when we could pick him up. She sounded really mean. I'll call you back tomorrow and let you know. So my mother was actually getting excited about it, was saying we can get the crib down from the attic and all this kind of stuff. Then the next day I go to work and I get laid off. When the social worker called back, she said, you can pick your baby up, but before you do, you have to pay me for your hospital, his hospital, and your doctor, his doctor, my counseling, the maternity home, and the foster home. She was going to keep the meter running at the foster home until that was paid in full. I couldn't have him until then. Okay, this still happens, by the way, in many states where the biological parents have to pay back for the fostering. So sorry about that. My cats are not getting along at the moment. Anyway, so yeah, this happens even today where biological parents have to pay back for the fostering. However, a lot of the times, I'm not saying every time, but a lot of the times, CPS takes a child because they can't differentiate between poverty and actual abuse. So they're just causing more issues with all of this, and instead of helping the biological family stay together and have support and resources, they're paying the foster family to take in this kid, and we know many foster families are not good. They're just doing it for the paycheck. Again, I'm not saying all, I'm just saying there's many of them out there. But this is still so common even today, and we're 50, 60, 70, 80 years, I think 80 years out. I can't do math right now, sorry guys, but excuse me. My point is, it's still happening and it's gross. Anyway, we're gonna keep going. I still can't remember the exact amount she told me, but it was thousands. I'm thinking that even if I got called back to work at $1.57 an hour, I just could not imagine how I would ever be able to get that much money. So I said, fine, I'll sign your effing paper because I'll never have that kind of money. She called to tell me when I would be signing the papers, and she wanted to know if I wanted to see him. And of course I did. I had one glimmer of hope. I asked my mom to go with me to see him because I thought she couldn't let this happen if she sees him. But she said no. I found out after he found me that was exactly why she said no. On February 14th, my dad drove me so I could sign. He parked 6 blocks away because he didn't want anyone to think that he had anything to do with this. I went into the social worker's office. She led me to some cold little institutional room. There was no light on, but there was a light shining through the Venetian blinds, and it was kind of a hazy winter day. I sat in a chair, and she brought my baby in. He was all bundled up. He was sleeping, and she handed him to me and left. I just sat and held him and cried. I was dropping big tears on him, and trying so hard to memorize his little face. He was just so cute, except he had some scratches and a kind of rash. I'm thinking, professional people are taking care of him, and this is how he looks? How did I ever think I could do it? Half an hour later, she came back and said, okay, your time is up. He didn't see me because he slept through the whole thing. I gave him back. It didn't even cross my mind not to give him back. I was just at rock bottom, totally hopeless. Instead of making her break my goddamn arms to get him, like I should have, I just did it. I left and walked the 6 blocks to my dad's car. He drove me to the lawyer's office. I went in and the lawyer asked me, Are you doing this because you want to? And I mumbled yes. And he said, okay, I'll see you in court tomorrow. I walked back to my dad's car and we went home and said nothing. The next day we drove to the courthouse, and I think it was a judge's chamber. It was this big wooden paneled courthouse. This time it was kind of warm, yellow sunlight. It always seemed like nobody had bright lights on. I had to go in there, and the judge asked me if I was doing this because I wanted to, if anybody was forcing me to, and I answered yes, because I want to. Nobody is forcing me to. I signed my name to I have no idea what, and I turned around and left. I didn't shed a tear. I showed nothing. I went to my dad's car, and from there he took me to a job interview at some savings and loan. I did pretty bad. This time, my dad parked right out in front. Then I got back in the car and we went home. And we never once mentioned it again. You'd think we just dumped clothes off at the Salvation Army. The next day, I went out with my friends and I drank until I puked. I was unemployed for about 6 weeks. Then I got a job at another factory. This one was a piston ring factory. I don't know what piston rings were. I had to ride to work with these creepy guys from my hometown because they drove past our house. I had an iron bar and the piston rings were in stacks of 100, and I had to stick the bar in the rings, tilt it, dip it in this tank of solvent, pick it up, drain it off, then put the rings on these metal trees with arms that looked like Christmas trees. I did that for about 8 hours a day. Occasionally, I would be sent to this little room and have to dip stuff in tar. I still have excuse me, scars, where was I? On my arm where the tar splashed. I did this for about 6 weeks. It was mind-numbing, but I was trying to be a good girl. The supervisor who taught me how to do all this stuff was balding, not a very nice woman. She walked up to me one day and said, "What are you doing?" "I'm doing exactly what you told me to do, ma'am." She said, "That's not how I told you to do it. Give me that thing." She does some kind of backhanded little maneuver and then said, "Now do it the way I told you." I tried to do it that way, and 100 piston rings fell on the floor. She says, "Now pick 'em up." And I took the iron bar and I said, "F you," and I threw it at her. Thank God I missed. It bounced off the wall behind her. I just started screaming at the top of my lungs and ran to the bathroom and sat there screaming and screaming, not even sobbing, just screaming. They got the personal manager, and he's a man, to come to the ladies' room and try to talk me down. I can't even explain it. It was like I had tried and tried and tried to do all these what all the effing adults want me to do, and it still wasn't right. He finally convinced me to stop screaming and led me out to his car, and he took me back to my family. When my dad and my brother found out why I was home before I was supposed to be, well, all hell broke loose. "You useless piece of no good shit. Can't even hold a goddamn job," and so on and so on. "If you don't get back to that goddamn job." So the next morning, the guys from my hometown picked me up, and I went back to work. I no longer had to dip rings in solvent. I got to sort them. God knows how many bad piston rings got sold. There was a little old lady there that I talked to, and she'd been doing this for 25 years. I said, "So how do you know the good from the bad?" I had no idea what I was doing. I don't know that she did either. The personal guy called me into his office and told me that he didn't think I was factory material, and that they were going to have to permanently lay me off at the end of 2 weeks. He said that I should really think about going to college. I didn't tell my family. I got fired. I had the guys who took me to work, take me to the employment office every day. I would sit in the Catholic church in the morning and draw pictures and write morbid poetry and then go to the employment office. I called the social worker to find out how my baby was doing. He wasn't adopted yet. She said, he's probably too old. We don't know if anybody's going to want him. She said, do you have any deafness in your family? Do you have any ear problems? I said, my sister had a bad left ear and infections when she was little and had to be hospitalized. Why? Well, we think he's deaf. We don't think he's adoptable. I said, I want him back. No, I don't care. If he grows up the word of the state, you will never get him back. I hate this. Sorry, guys. It's so tough to read. It sucks being adopted. Oh, you're not adoptable because you might have a disability, or you're not adoptable because of your race or your gender or your location. Not that makes it any better, but yeah, anyway. All right, continuing on. I got another job washing dishes in the kitchens at the TB sanatorium. I had to wear a little mask so I wouldn't get TB. God forbid I should die with a life like that. Somewhere along the line, it dawned on me. This thing about if you have other kids, you're going to forget this. I'm thinking I'm going to have another baby, but I knew that I would never be pregnant again. And unmarried, I'd find a way to kill myself first. This is absolutely no way in hell I would ever go through that again. I hadn't seen the guy who I thought, if I'm going to get married someday, it'll be him since January. In April, I wrote him a little letter telling him I had something to tell him. He wrote back and said he'd be home for college that weekend. He showed up and I had nothing to tell him. I just wanted to see him again. We go out and by then, I'm able to talk. Unlike when I saw him right after my son was born. When the evening ended, he said, what was it you wanted to tell me? I said, nothing. I just wanted to see you. We've been together ever since. We've been married 35 years. Okay, that is sweet. I'm sorry. I know that it's tough with the whole baby situation, but that is just a little sweet romantic moment. Anyway, continuing on. On my son's 21st birthday, I dug papers out from the back of my underwear drawer where I kept them. I filled out some paperwork and sent it to the state of Wisconsin, and I never really let myself hope. I didn't let myself get my hopes up that he would find me. One day, I'm at my studio, and I get a phone call from the Catholic Social Services asking if I still want to know my son. I said, of course. Well, do you want him to write you a letter, or would you like him to call you? I said, listen, I didn't wait 23 years to wait even longer for a letter. He can call me. I hung up the phone, burst into tears, and ran across the hall to tell one of my very best friends, whom I'd never told about my son. I called my husband and said, guess what? The chickens have come home to roost. Our farm background here. This will never be a secret again from here on out. I packed up my stuff and went home, picked up my 15-year-old and said, I have something to tell you. You have a brother. This is my A-plus student. She said, no way, dude. Cool, Mom. That was it. No questions. We had supper, and I hadn't told the two other girls. They were watching something on TV, and the phone rang, and it was my son. I cannot describe hearing your child's voice for the first time when he's 23. It's just indescribable. He sounded so much like my brother and my favorite first cousin. We exchanged statistics and covered all that basic stuff. Then it was, well, now what do we do? I had never read anything about adoption in all these years. So I said, well, I don't know what we should do next, but I'll tell you one thing. I want you to know absolutely everything I missed if you're willing to tell me. I want to hear everything. He took me at my word and we talked for 4 hours, sorry. I got off the phone and everybody says, "Mom, who are you talking to?" And I said, "Well, it's a really long story. I'll tell you as soon as that show is over." And when it was, I told them. When I was 19, I had a baby. He is your brother, and that was him on the phone. He wants to know us. One daughter says, "That's cool," and the other daughter says, "Yeah, that's great." And they all went to bed. I didn't sleep. I got up, started writing, and I have continued to write all in longhand with old ink pens. I had never stopped to think. I had been running through life. I'd gone from my childhood, which was just a matter of survival, to a major trauma, where the lid came off when I reunited with him. I really think I was clinically nuts. I sobbed. I swear it took every bit of power I had not to be sobbing when I was with my daughters. Thank God they were in school, so I had some time alone. I would just sob and write. I never slept more than 3 hours at a time. I think the lack of sleep made me crazier. I just wrote and wrote and wrote. Poor guy, I wrote my son a letter every day, and they must have been pages long. He said, "I've never read this much before in my life, Mom." When I look back at my life, the only thing I would change would be to find a way to keep from losing my son. I wouldn't even change getting pregnant in the first place. After he found me, I found myself sitting out in my garage smoking and writing and sobbing and thinking, if only I had ever had a handgun, I would make it stop. But then I thought of my youngest, who was only 8, and I would cork the wine. Regardless of how much hell I was in, I could not do that because I could never, ever hurt my kids like that. So I am still here. It is the loss of that baby. When he came to see us, maybe a month into the reunion, I just remember standing there, hugging him, just wanting to somehow have the power to crank the clock back 23 years, to do it over and get it right. It's just a horrible, horrible loss. I have this week-old granddaughter, and I look at her, and I just think of my son when he was that age. How could society think that was all right? He was not even entitled to be held by his own mother. It's all wrong. It's wrong. There was no reason he should have been removed from his mother. None. I never harmed a child. I hadn't harmed one since. It was all about what people would think. Yep, that's exactly what it is. It still happens today. I remember telling the social worker that I just really loved him, and that's why I wanted to keep him. And she said, "How can you be so selfish?" Okay, sorry, the phone rang. "How can you be so selfish?" And I was raised, "Oh God, don't be selfish." The reality was I really wasn't being selfish. I was being a mother. To have her tell me that my natural feelings as a mother were selfish was just, my God, it was just wrong. It really wasn't until maybe the last 2 years that I've been starting to put it back together. I remember standing in the kitchen at supper time and just sobbing, and my 13 and 15-year-old daughters put their arms around me and said, "Mom, you have to get help." It was the most difficult thing I ever had to do because for me to ask for help was just incredibly difficult. But because they told me I needed to, I did. I called my doctor, and it turns out his wife is a licensed psychologist. So I went to her for 15 months. She insisted that my problem was my childhood, not losing my son. And I insisted that it was losing him. But I think it was a combination of both. She just wanted to go on and on about my childhood. She insisted that it was about my mother. So her idea was I needed to draw a picture of my mother in a phone book and then beat the phone book with pieces of rubber hose she had. I really thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard, and I refused. I had no urge to hit my mother. But she did help me see that I actually had only one choice, which means there was no choice. She also helped me see that my boyfriend made his decision when he took a hike. I mean, she helped me see the reality of it. I was really, really blaming myself. How could I possibly have given away my own child? So I have no regrets that I went to the psychologist. I guess it helped me think. Maybe I'm okay. It's maybe okay to be me. It's just my whole life has just been based on shame. I'm probably over halfway through it, and I can't go through my life crying. I mean, it was so bad in the 90s. I had scabs under my eyes from wiping them. You hear about people's lives being touched by adoption. So usually when they say that, it's the adoptive parents, but yeah. It's no damn touch. I mean, that just drives me nuts. You're smashed by adoption. I mean, it alters the mother's lives forever, as well as the child. From everything I see, I think the general public believes that mothers who give their babies away are glad to get rid of them. They're glad to be rid of the problem. They think she didn't care about the kid. She just wanted him out of the way so that she could go on having a good time. I've heard people say that. It's like if you have a child and you're not married, you don't have the same maternal feelings that other mothers have. I have never, ever met a mother who felt that way. Never. So that's exactly right. Your maternal instincts, most people have it. I'm not going to say that there aren't people who don't, but just because you're married or not married, it should still be there, right? If you have it, you have it. And anyway, but birth mothers don't want to give away their babies. You know, they have no choice. They don't have support. They don't have resources. Less than 1% admit to not wanting their baby, and I feel like they're just in the fog, you know, just my opinion on that. But 99% of birth mothers wanted to parent. Think about that. 99% admit to wanting to parent if they had support and resources. So that's pretty sad. Anyway, my father-in-law and I had the same birthday, and we were quite tight. He told me that the week before my husband and I were married, the priest had called to tell him that their son was marrying a woman who was a sinner, who lived with another man and born his child. They had also gotten an anonymous letter in the mail when our engagement was in the newspaper, telling them that their son was marrying a whore who had a kid. I said, I want to see that letter. I figured I'd spot the handwriting. He said, we read it, tore it up, and burned it in the ashtray. To me, they are quality people. I mean, never once did they ever mention a word to their son about who he was marrying. I mean, really, you can't meet better people than that. If there's a silver lining in this, I think it made my children a whole lot more compassionate than they would have been. None of them are ever quick to judge anyone. But there is a dichotomy that I have because I shouldn't have been left in the care of my mother. I remember sitting at the table with my mom and my grandma telling her, you have to stop beating her, or I'm going to find a way to get her away from you. Everyone knew it was bad, but nobody could quite stop it. My grandmother wanted to send me off to a private boarding school for high school. She raised chickens, sold the chickens, butchered them, sold eggs, and she was going to pay for it. My dad said, hell no, she's my kid and she's living with me. Now and then he would make an effort to make my mother stop. Damn it, leave that kid alone. And then he'd go out to the barn and do his chores, and she'd beat the crap out of me. So when he would speak up, I would just cringe. When I was 10, I went outside and sat in the snow. I just decided I was going to sit outside until I was dead because I didn't want to live with her anymore. Somehow my dad noticed I was missing and came out there. Get in the house, you moron, he said. I said okay, and I went back in. She was just nuts. When I was in 3rd grade, she came in to tuck my sister in and tripped over one of her high-heeled shoes that my sister had been playing with. She picked it up and started beating me with it because it was my fault. In the morning, I'm brushing my hair for school, and it's all stuck together because it's bloody. So I wore a little cowboy scarf with a horse on the back that I got from my Uncle Louie, who lived in Arizona. I get to school, and I'm supposed to take my scarf off, and I said, "Oh no, I have a head cold, and I have to keep it on." I didn't want my teacher to see the caked on blood. The abuse from my mother certainly prepared me to be a birth mother. Get out there and live that life. Life is okay when it isn't. So I was in basic training until the time came when I could enlist. You know what? I really miss my mom. My brother and my sister-in-law had put her in the nut ward of an Alzheimer's unit. She's in there, and people who make noises that a lot of people that have never heard. I can't get her out because I have power of nothing. I can't save her, but I miss her. I really, really miss her. After my son found me, she was very, very nice. We talked all about my childhood. She kept me up until 4 a.m. wanting to talk about it, and how sorry she was for being so horrible. I just feel so strongly that our stories need to be told. Most importantly, our babies. They had no choice whatsoever in this. I'm thrilled that the one choice my son did have to find me, he made. I mean, both he and I agreed that there will never, regardless of how long we live and how wonderful life is, there will never be anything in either of our lives that will stop finding each other. You asked about the pain of the reunion. My son didn't cause the pain when he came back. He has never been the cause of any pain. The pain was always there. It just came out in the reunion. I was still bearing that. If it hadn't been the reunion, there could have been something else in my life that could have broken it loose. I've always thought, from the instant I knew I was pregnant, that he was innocent in all of this. He didn't choose to be born. He didn't cause any pain. Actually, by tripping it loose, he's the reason that I have been able to heal as much as I have, and I am very grateful for that. All right, that is the end of Yvonne's story, and I just want to take a moment here because often it's used against us that, biological parents abuse their kids too. Yes, we know that. Adoptees are not saying that external care isn't necessary, but in Yvonne's case, she should have been taken away from her biological mother, right, because of the beatings. Her dad should have left. Her grandmother could have taken her in. That would have been kinship. It could have been fictive kin, so she could have gone to a friend or someone within the community. Could have been a legal guardianship. There are other legal options that exist and have existed where she could have been in a safer situation without losing that biological connection. And as you can hear from her story, despite all the pain she went through, she still misses her mom. She still needed that biological connection. And that's exactly what we're saying. We're not saying she deserved the abuse. Of course not. Nobody does. And she absolutely deserved the safety, right? And she was failed on so many fronts. By her dad, by her grandma, by teachers, by people in the community, by her mom especially, the one who's doing the beating. But it never should have ended in adoption. And as she said, adoption causes a lot of pain on all fronts. So there is that. I'm glad she's in reunion. And it seems to have also helped her father and her mother in the end. She didn't really she talked about one of her brothers. She didn't talk about the sister. But I think it's really important that we mention the reunion part as well. Anyway, tomorrow we're going to be talking about the family's fears and so on. So I will see you then.